it's a great delight for us actually to welcome the team from the UN Habitat team from the Global Solutions Division, and which is a division that is based in UN Habitat headquarters in Nairobi. Then I think the team actually works across continents at the moment. Is that right? So we have people from the headquarters itself, and also have the technical team working out from Colombia in Bogota. Is that correct, Rafael?
Yes, that is correct. In Colombia, excellent. Both in Bogota and in Bucaramanga.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. So actually, I've done models of these zones, and both actually are our model zones at one stage. I could still remember, and also my colleagues like Marcial, who probably has just taking a break at the moment, but Marcial is going to come back here. So perhaps I will start this session, and I will then introduce Remy, who is the leader of this group of colleagues from UN Habitat. And then Remy will then introduce the colleagues, and then we do the presentation. Is that a good plan, Remy? You think that's okay? Okay, I can see Remy nodding. And also, I'm conscious that I can see now we have a lot of new colleagues just joined. So what I will do is to give a brief introduction to the workshop, so that the people who have just joined actually could have a clear idea of what we're trying to achieve and so on. And then I'll introduce Remy as the convener of this particular session. So greetings, and my name is Ying, and I'm the lead convener of the Applied Urban Modeling Symposium Series, or AUM, as is known in the field. On behalf of the scientific committee and my fellow conveners of AUM, I'd like to welcome you all on this particular session, which is looking at the world's metropolitan regions, both in terms of overviews and case studies. The idea of this online workshop is really to invite colleagues who are dedicated to the development of new urban analysis and modeling, and then to see what key urban challenges they are facing, and also the ways in which they have put forward to address these challenges. In this way, the workshop effectively becomes a survey of the world's urban challenges, given that it goes around the different time zones. And also, we are very interested, and we're in fact fascinated to hear different kinds of advances that have been made in applied modeling fields in tackling these challenges. And for this, in a sense, we treat this as a kind of excellent examples of the best papers that we have received from Oceania, Asia, Africa, Europe, and Americas, and so on. And of course, the whole workshop is really long. So I would only expect colleagues to attend some of these, and while watching the videos for other sessions as they are uploaded onto our website. Then there are 3 quick points to note in terms of logistics of the session. The first is that this workshop is run in the Zoom meeting format, which people I think are relatively familiar with, which gives every delegate the opportunity to communicate directly to any other colleague on the session, and also to communicate to the whole audience. And secondly, if you'd like to ask a question after a presentation, you can either raise your Zoom hand and to be invited to ask the question live, or you can use the chat box that we monitor. And also, we'd like to finish generally 5 minutes before the whole, in the second hour, and at the end of the second hour, so that we allow time to have the changeover. So now really is the time for me to introduce Mr. Remy Sietchiping. I hope that's a correct pronunciation, who leads the policy, legislation, and the governance section within the Global Solutions Division of UN Habitat, which I said earlier is based in UN Habitat headquarters in Nairobi. And Remy has coordinated global, regional, and country projects in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And he has worked extensively on land and urban issues. And he has a PhD in geography and has a really impressive range of experiences, both in universities, private sector, state government of Victoria in Australia, and also in UN Economic Commission for Africa. So really is a great person actually to lead the session. So I'll hand over to Remy for you to say a little about yourselves first, and then perhaps you can introduce your colleagues who are going to give the presentation along with you. Remy.
Thank you, Prof. Jin. Really a great pleasure here. I hope you are hearing me well. On behalf of on behalf of my colleagues, the United Nations and UN Habitat in particular, to join this distinguished class or group of thinkers and doers, especially in the modeling world, and in this case, looking at the case of cities. Yes, you already mentioned where I come from, what I've been working on. Maybe just to add a small twist that when my PhD was on modeling and simulation, so it's back home in
fantastic.
A way. So
Great.
It's very interesting to see this world going, and we hope that in our work we try to incorporate some of these ideas, and you will see in some of the things we'll be presenting and some of the things we have planned that we are still very close to, the power of modeling and simulation to understand and decomplexify, the world that we are living in, especially in the context of what you call the new urban world, as the title of the session, which was a great choice. So we work in a department that covers many dimensions. We work on urban policy, on urban legislation, on urban governance, metropolitan management, and urban role linkages, all that encompassing the support we provide, particularly to member states and to partners. So what we'll be sharing here with colleagues is looking at just a small piece of the work we do and how it intersects with other areas of work. And to do so, since we serve the global constituency, we're going to give a broader picture of what we know and what the data, the evidence is pointing us to, because we believe in that the nexus between science and policy, that science-policy interface is very strong to us, because there's no policy relevance without facts and evidence that are supporting the decisions and policies. So that's the basis of our presentation here. And those evidences that we will be presenting are not only data, but also example case studies. That's why we picked, in this case, Latin America and Africa, to just give you a glimpse of what is happening there, what have been uncovering, and what type of assistance we have been providing to our constituency. So this, we feel that we have to do so and encapsulate that evidence in what we we present in the global effort we are undertaking on the global state of metropolitan areas, of which modeling is one of the tools we'll be using to provide that evidence. We also would like to see when we prepare, give you a glimpse of the things that we are working on. If you have some feedback on, does it make sense? Are there other cases? Are there other evidence out there that we might be missing? So a bit of validation, appreciation of the work we are doing. We also would like to, we are working with many municipalities, and we are in the thinking of developing a network of metropolitan or people working on metropolitan areas. And we hope that in this type of engagement, Cambridge could also come and play a role, especially in this area of modeling, as we have a partner in Israel which is very much interested in the culture of metropolitan areas. So different dimensions of metropolitan areas where we would like to bring this all the constituency together in the context of really what the spirit of modeling is, to decomplexify and create a network of knowledge around that. So that's what we have in store. So we have 3 colleagues who we share. We have behind the colleagues, there are other colleagues and other partners who have contributed to this work. So they are just the voice of many people. My first, in the next hour and a half, we're going to have 3 sets of conversations. The first one, I have a great pleasure to invite my colleagues Rafael Forero, who is leading our work on governance and metropolitan areas, and who had been your main interlocutor in preparing this session. So he knows the in and out of the session, to give us an overview of what the data is telling us on this topic, and some of the efforts we have in the pipeline. And if anyone is interested, you can get back to us and we can discuss and see how we can support and engage. So Rafa, without further ado, if you have 12-15 minutes to just take us through what the data is telling us in terms of metropolitan areas at the global level. Over to you, Rafa.
Thank you, Remy. Thank you for that introduction. Also, thank you, Professor Ying and the University of Cambridge for having us today. Good day, afternoon, and good night to all of you, wherever you be. So thank you for attending this session. Let me to share my screen before to start the presentation. I hope you are seeing my screen now. Can you please confirm, Professor?
Yes, and very well. Perfect.
Okay, so as Remy mentioned before, we will start our session with a quickly and general overview on some of the last recent analysis, data, numbers, figures on how cities and metropolises are evolving around the world. I also like to start with this figure that, of course, all of us know already, and we know that the world is becoming increasingly urban. Also, we know that in 2010 we had a really turning point, because in that year most of the half of the global population becoming urban, and today we are about, or we have about 55-56% of the global population being urban. But we started to think how will be this trend at the end of this century? How will be the world? How will be the urban reality, for instance, in 2100? And we have some initial and speculative projections and numbers. We have a start here about that we will live in a world of 10 billion inhabitants approximately. And some people start even to say that from that 10 billion inhabitants, the 90% will be urban. So we are speaking about 9 billion urban inhabitants in the world, which is almost the double that today. And this is, of course, and this comes to us with several challenges, both in terms of equality, quality of life, but also in the management models that we need to use to manage that world. How will be cities in 2100? How will be cities at the end of the century? I think no one's know, but we have some hints. We can have some hints from data and from models and from projections, which I think it is the added value of the today's session. Have some initial hints, some initial projections on how will be the urban world during the coming decades. So we will start speaking about the world's metropolitan regions. What is the states, the global states of metropolis, but also how can be these new approaches to manage those metropolises, those cities. So let me start with the global state of metropolis and with the data we have so far. First, this is not a new subject in UN Habitat. We actually started to look at the urban prospects and to study and to know how are the cities for more than 10 years ago. In 2010, we started to study the number of cities that we have worldwide, and we found that there were in that year at least 4,200 cities with more than 100,000 inhabitants, which represented in that year the 70% of the urban population. You can see in your presentation, you can see the maps, the points in where that cities are located. That is a figure from 2010. Then more than where are the cities, we started to ask how are those cities and how those cities have been growing during the last century. So we started the discussion as preparation for the third conference of United Nations on urban settlements, sustainable urban urbanization and housing, the Habitat 3 conference. And we prepared this report, the Fundamentals of Urbanization. We took a sample of those cities. We took a 200 city sample in order to know how cities had grown, how those processes of urbanization were developed around the world. And we got some bad news, mainly bad news. The first was that a great percentage of the new cities, of the new urban population are growing on an informal way. Approximately the 30% of the new cities, the new urban territory that is being created currently is being created or is being urbanizing informally. That is a first bad symptom. But we also got another bad news, which is that the public space is decreasing. Along with the increasing numbers of informality, there are also decreasing numbers on rates of public space among cities around the world. But maybe the most related bad news that we got and that it is linked with the presentation that today and today's session is that urban extension has surpassed urban population growth. And this happened both in developing and in developed countries. We can see there the numbers, the graphics. At your left, you have the developing countries graphic. You can see the red line, which corresponds to the rates of urban extent or urban territory or urban extension growth. And then you have the blue lines, which correspond with the urban population growth. You can see in both graphics that urban extension surpassed by almost the double the urban population growth. This is very important because this tells us that the municipality, the city proper, jurisdiction is not enough anymore to manage territorial and urban dynamics. Because these rates of urban extension, of course, that cities and municipalities are conurbating themselves and are creating a new typology of city, a new typology of territory, which we call metropolises, actually. And we have several names and several conceptual approaches to define metropolis. But we around the world and metropolis experts and metropolis representatives agreed in something, which is that they are cities that comprise not only the urban territory, but also the peri-urban and rural areas, which are economically and socially connected or linked to the cities. So we can see around the world many cities of several and different typologies, big cities, of course, mega cities, of course, but also intermediate and small cities which share these characteristics, which are connected with urban and peri-urban territories, and that which also comprise economically, socially, and environmental interdependencies. And that situation and that finding give us a hint to start to think a new model of urban management, a new model of territorial management in where municipal management is not enough anymore. Of course, we are not speaking about the end of municipalities, not at all, but we are starting to think about that collaboration among municipalities, cooperation and coordination among local jurisdiction, local governments are necessary to overcome the challenges of the 21st century cities. Of course, you have, for instance, here the map of Greater London, which is an ancient metropolis. All of us know, of course, the city, where the city becomes, where the city started, the city of London, which is the city proper. You can see the city of London, the city proper in yellow in the map, but you can see also the other 32 boroughs which compose the metropolis today. And you can see also in the map in gray layout on the map, you can see the urban agglomeration territory and the urban extension. One important finding that we also have is that not always, and actually mostly of the times, the jurisdictional boundaries doesn't correspond with the territorial dynamics. So we can have agglomerated territories, but we also have fragmented jurisdictional realities. And for that, metropolitan management, not only from governance, but also from planning, from legislation, regulation, policies, and financing is becoming increasingly important for us. We can see that situation in London, which is about to becoming a mega city, which is about to reach the 10 million inhabitants, but we can see also that reality in another small and intermediate cities. For instance, we can see the same reality in the metropolitan area in Bucaramanga in Colombia, which is composed by 4 municipalities and which is about 1.2 million inhabitants. Actually, my colleague Maria will show you and will present you more about these metropolises and will showcase how we are supporting some of its planning and governance instruments. And you can see also that reality, for instance, in Delhi. They call like the national capital territory of Delhi. My colleagues from India participating in this session can of course wide in this reality. But we have also this situation, for instance, in South Africa, in Port Elizabeth, or how they call the Nelson Mandela Metropolitan Municipality. You can see in all these cities that the city proper and the urban agglomeration has surpassed the municipal boundary. So all those cities, being small, intermediate, big or mega cities, are all metropolises. And in that way, they are similar, not in numbers in economic numbers or in population numbers, no, but in the way that they need to be managed. They need to be managed in an integrative way, in a comprehensive way. They are all similar in that sense. With that findings, with that situation, we started to analyze how many cities in the world share these characteristics. How many metropolises are there? And for that, we took the last UN urbanization prospect from 2018, and we took especially the data sets related to urban agglomerations. You can see there, and you can then, of course, access to the data set, because they are of free access. You can write, of course, the analysis, the data, and the numbers that we are presenting today. But we took these prospects and we found this, and this is very impressive. This is impressionant. We have around the world a lot of metropolises of different sizes, different size, different typologies, and different characteristics. But all of them comprise and represent about the 60% of the world's urban population, which is the same that a third of humanity, a third of global population today. We are speaking about 2.6 billion people living in metropolises today, in among almost 2,000 metropolises, 1,934 metropolis to be more precisely. Also, we can see and we can you have there some of the distribution of size of these metropolis. For instance, we have and this is another good finding. We have a very small group of metropolises that have surpassed 10 million inhabitants, only 34, while 51 have population between 5 and 10 millions. Then we have almost 500 between 1 million and 5 million, and finally the largest group is the small metropolises, which is about 1,400 metropolises from 300,000 to 1 million population. You have there the map, and you can see, for instance, in red dots, you can see the big metropolises with more than 10 million inhabitants, which are the small group, the smallest group. But you can also see the green dots, which correspond to the small metropolises, which is the more representative group. How those metropolises are distributed and how they have been growing. We have here some figures. For instance, we know that today metropolises are the more common typology of urban settlements around the world. It is not more the municipal typology, but the agglomeration typology. The metropolitan typology is the most commonly today around the world. For instance, almost the 40% of the global population is projected to become metropolitan during the next 15 years. We are talking about almost the 60% of the global population. You can see there the graphic. The non-urban territory will correspond with the 37.5% of the population, global population, and also another urban typologies which will correspond in 2035 with the 23% of global population. And of course, the almost the 40% will correspond to metropolitan areas in 2035. And we are speaking about a population approximately of 3.5 billion people in 2035 to be metropolitan inhabitants. But we also found an interesting correlation between population growth and metropolises growth. This is a very important graphic and a very important finding. We found that urban population growth and new metropolises are rising are related. Among the world's region, in all the world's regions, of course, we have Asia Pacific leading that growth and following by Africa. And then we have another group which correspond to Latin America and the Caribbean, very close to the situation in Western Europe and in North America. And in the last place, we have Eastern Europe, which is almost stabilized. But the important relation, the important positive correlation that we found here is that as the urban population will grow, the same will be with new metropolises. So we are speaking about 429 new metropolis during the next 15 years. This is this correspond, or this is the same that one new metropolis each 2 weeks will be a rise in the next 15 years. So the total number will be 2,363 metropolises by 2035. Also, we found an interesting regional distribution. Of course, as we know, Asia Pacific is leading both the regional prominence in metropolitan population, but also the regional prominence in number of metropolis. I will not read all the results, but let me highlight in a couple of them. For instance, you can see that Asia Pacific represent today more of the half of the metropolitan population around the world. Approximately the 56% of the metropolitan population lives today in Asia Pacific metropolises. In more than 1,000 Asia Pacific metropolises, you can see that Western Europe and Latin America and Africa are similar in both regional population prominence and number of metropolises. And you also can see that Eastern Europe is the less prominence because the situation there is almost stable, both in population growth, but also in metropolitan growth. This is very interesting because you can see that, of course, as we know before, that the most of the population growth is being in the developing countries, but also the urban agglomeration process is corresponding with developing countries. The figures, the largest figures are presented in developing countries. And I think this is the last one, the last figure, the last graphic, and this is also important, the distribution of world's metropolises by size. We can use this graphic to make several and diverse analysis, but I always like to highlight in one analysis because it's related with an urban myth, which is that the world is becoming a world of megacities, and that megacities are increasingly growing, and that is not necessarily the situation. You can see there that actually, as we presented before, megacities is the smallest group within the metropolitan reality along the world. But this graphic tells us that during the next 15 years, only 14 new megacities will arise. At the same time that almost 500 metropolises will arise, only 14 among those almost 500 will be megacities. So we are not seeing, we have not a trend of a war of megacities. No, maybe of course megacities will concentrate the most interesting and important connections in the global system of cities. Of course, they are the hubs, they are economic hubs and also cultural and political hubs, of course. And this is important to geopolitics, of course. But we are seeing in the territorial situation, the territorial dynamics, we are seeing that the predominant metropolises will be intermediate metropolises. Intermediate metropolises will be the most increasing typology of metropolises, and they are actually today the more present in our analysis, the small and the intermediate metropolises, instead of megacities, as many of us thought before. So all those numbers on and those figures give us to start to think in a new approach for metropolitan management. And of course, UN Habitat intent is not the first one. Of course, that several other international, regional, and local organizations had thought before in this kind of approach. But the most of the approach that we can find today are sectoral approach. For instance, we can see some economical approaches, some governance approaches, or some sectorial like transport related approaches or environmental related approaches. But we in UN Habitat are promoting a comprehensive and integrative approach for metropolitan management. Of course, this integrative, this comprehensive approach nurtured from existing approaches, both sectoral and for instance, economical or governance approaches, but it is also more related with a new theory of change for sustainable urbanization that we adopted a couple of years ago through our strategic plan. This theory of change for sustainable urbanization has four important domains and four important drivers of change, which are first, policy and legislation, second, urban planning, third, governance, and fourth, finance. And we think that joining those four drivers of change, we can achieve a comprehensive approach for managing metropolitan reality. So we are thinking about understanding metropolitan management from policy, from planning, from governance, and from financing mechanisms. And we think that the final outcome of the final result of this integrative management will be a balanced territorial development. And this will serve to bring the urban and rural inequalities and the territorial inequalities among world's metropolises. Based on that, we are preparing, Remy mentioned some of this at his presentation, but I want to highlight a couple of figures. We are preparing a global state of metropolis report. We have this structure in where we analyze how those metropolises that we just saw in the maps, how those metropolises are growing and are being managed. That is important for us, knowing how metropolises are being managed, how are being managed from the policy dimension, from the planning dimension, the governance, and the economical ones. And for that, we have selected a global sample of metropolises. This is not a quantitative representative sample, of course, because we are talking about 50 metropolises around the world. Of course, from all size, not only small, not only big and megacities, but also intermediate and small metropolises. But we are speaking about 50 metropolis in an universe of almost 2,000 metropolis. This is, of course, not quantitative representative, but it is qualitative. And we are interested in knowing how these metropolises are being managed and what practices can be translated and can inspire metropolitan management in other parts of the world. So actually, my colleagues, Maria and Frederic, will present you some of these cases and how metropolitan management has been developing in some of these metropolises around the world. I would like to over to Remy and to Professor Ying, maybe open the floor to some question and answer before Maria's and Frederic presentations. Thank you, Remy. Thank you, Professor Ying, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Rafael. And Remy, would you like to open the floor briefly for any clarification questions at this point?
Yeah, we have about 1 hour. So let's put any clarification questions, any contribution, but just to acknowledge, you can also contribute through the chat as Maria is getting ready. I don't know if anyone, yeah, I can see Jamil has would like to contribute. Jamil, please go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, Rafael. Thank you for this very enlightening presentation. These are striking trends. I just had a question on how you define the city center. For instance, in the case of London, it is quite straightforward because it even works as a centroid. But in other cases, in particular coastal cities, it is harder to establish exactly where the center is. Thank you.
Okay,
Rafa, let's see if there's anyone else, then you can maybe take 2 or 3. Anyone else?
Marcel? You're muted.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I just wanted to make a comment about Rafael's presentation, very useful and comprehensive. You know, most of the metropolis around the history, especially in the developed world, has been created by extensions of the urban core. And for me, one of the very interesting lessons of these extensions has been the European case when rapid urbanization took place. And the contrast between Paris and Barcelona is very, very interesting. While Paris in the 19th century concentrated in renewing and restructuring the urban core with the plan of Haussmann, the Catalan in Barcelona really took care of the extension and created enormous extension by Cerdà, which allowed the city to grow in a very organic way. You remember that Paris, this Paris of Haussmann within the old walls, is only 2 million of Parisians, while 9 million are outside. While in Barcelona was very different. Most of the extension took place in an organized way. Can we learn something from this way for the metropolitan development of all developing countries, which we don't seem to concentrate in planning for the future and the extensions around it, which we ought to be concentrated? Thank you.
Thanks, Marshall. Anyone else before Rafa comes in? Okay, Rafa, maybe you get started.
Thank you, Remy. Thank you, Jamila and Marshall. Let me start with the question from Jamil. We understand the city center as the place in where the metropolis is born. So, for instance, and this is, I think this is a difficult, it's easy to mapping the case of London, but it's also difficult to compare today because London is an ancient city. So, of course, the city proper of London born almost 2,000 years ago. But we can see, for instance, the cases of Bucaramanga, Delhi, or Port Elizabeth in different regions of the world. In Bucaramanga, we can see that, of course, the city proper corresponds almost with the municipal boundary that today, but the agglomeration territory corresponds with the municipal territory of another 3 jurisdictions. But the general answer is that we understand the city proper as the place in where the city born, not necessary, and this is of course a trend around the world. Not necessary the city proper corresponds with the municipal boundary, as not necessary the metropolitan jurisdictional or the metropolitan jurisdiction corresponds with the urban agglomeration or the urban agglomerated territory. This is a gap that we are trying to close. But of course, all this analysis and all these typologies and definition depends on member states, because we from United Nations analyze the data and the typologies that member state use. So member state reported to the population division of United Nations based on their proper typologies and data and numbers and census, and we try to standardize these different typologies and census around the world and methodological census, and we try to find a better way to compare. But of course, we always will have challenges to make exactly and proper international comparison. Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay. So, but let me add something to my reply. Is that of course the territorial dimension is important, and it's important to understand and to know historically where the city become and how the city is extending, and how the urban agglomeration today is related with the jurisdictional agglomeration. But we think that the more important thing, and this is an important insight from our side, is the cooperation among those jurisdictions, and the cooperation and collaboration among urban, peri-urban, and rural territories. And that is what we are trying to promote: cooperation and collaboration among several jurisdictions, being local, municipal, metropolitan, region, cooperation, collaboration, in order to achieve a kind of balanced territorial development. And that brings me to the comment of Professor Marshall, which is very interesting. Of course, the comparison between Paris, the Paris of Haussmann, which is, of course, the icon of urban modernity, all the transformation of Haussmann and Napoleon III. Of course, this is like a global example. And also the Barcelona of Cerdà. I think it is, they are different between themselves, but they are not so different like the situation in another parts of the world. They are more similar between themselves, that if you compare it with metropolises, for instance, in Latin America or in Africa, because both Paris and Barcelona grow in a kind of planning way, you know. But if you look at the situation of several metropolises in Latin America, they are growing exponentially in an informal way. As I mentioned it before, almost the 30% of the new metropolitan growth is being informally. So that is a big challenge, and that is why we think that maybe some metropolises in Latin America, in Africa, and in some parts of Asia and Pacific can actually learn of cases like Paris and Barcelona. Of course, Paris and Barcelona have their own challenges today, but the way that they were planned and they achieved cooperation and collaboration. For instance, we can see the case of Barcelona and the metropolitan area of Barcelona, which is composed by 36 municipalities, and they all are working together and have established governance, government bodies, and have adopted planning instruments, and have also sectoral authorities, for instance, to regulate transport, environment, climate change, and so on, that are very inspiring practices to metropolises in developing countries. So, of course, it is an important and interesting comparison, but I think that they are also inspiring practices to metropolises in other parts of the world. Professor Marshall, want to reply?
Yeah, well, thank you very much. But I was making a point, probably not very clear, that most of Paris was developed very haphazard, without any plan. The banlieue, which has 9 million people living, they didn't have a plan. it was very spontaneous, very much like the developing world in Latin America. Of course, there is a difference of income, and it's mainly Latin America has slum development, but in Paris wasn't very different. It was pretty slummy around their banlieue, which most of the population lives. But the question, I think, one key element in Paris, which is different from Barcelona, which was all planned at the beginning, not now, but at the beginning was all planned, is that it was very low density comparatively. So allows for renewal and redevelopment fairly easily. And if you build in very high density in the periphery, it's very hard, very difficult to integrate later developments. So the lessons of Paris, I think, are very relevant for Latin American cities and for other cities in the world. So that was my point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Understood. It is an important point also, this comparison between the metropolises that are highly density, of course, and lower density. Here in Latin America, some metropolises are starting to adopt a multi-centrality approach in those places we are highly densified, and of course urban renewal is not always easy and is not always possible. So the metropolises here, and Bucaramanga is one of the case of that, and Maria will speak about that now. But they are adopting in their plan, in their metropolitan plan, they are adopting an approach of multi-centralities in order to for instance, having economic and cultural and social centers in several of their municipalities, and not only in the city proper or in the city core. But of course, that is a very important point, Professor, and thank you for highlighting. So, Remy, over to you.
All right, thanks. Very important. I think this issue of organic versus structured, or what we call planning, is sometimes a fallacy. There's nothing that is completely, there's always, and that's why modeling is so important. They explain the rationale behind the growth. You may think it's haphazard, but it's a certain logic in it, as some may found out. And of course, metropolitan areas are a moving target. The dynamics, they change in terms of demographic, in terms of structures, in terms of functions, in terms of their spatial composition. So you look, 10, 15 years, they are all different in a way. So again, a very important topic of research. So we're going to see this happening also in 3 examples in Latin America. We're going to look at the example of Colombia, in San Salvador, and where is it again? Okay. So I will let Maria, who leads our work on the Metro Hub, to give us a glimpse of what it is and how you have been able to apply that in 3 places in Latin America, just to bring out that issue of multi-centrality that Rafa was talking about. Maria, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Remy. Thank you very much for the invitation. It is a pleasure to present the Metro Hub initiative and its application in metropolitan areas of Latin America. Let me share the presentation. Thank you, Rafa. Metro Hub is an UN Habitat initiative to support sustainable development in metropolises and regions of the world. Its areas of action are, next, Rafa. Its areas of are development of capacities of metropolitan and regional authorities and actors, formulation of sectoral metropolises policies, drafting and improvement of metropolitan legal framework, strengthening of supramunicipal governance scheme, design of metropolitan and regional planning instruments, and innovation in financing mechanisms at the metropolitan and regional scale. Let us see some cases in which MetroHub has supported metropolitan management in Latin America. In Colombia, MetroHub has provided support to 6 metropolitan areas of the country in different areas such as legislation, planning, governance, and finance. But perhaps the case where the most comprehensive support has been carried out in the metropolitan areas of Bucaramanga, which have more than 1 million inhabitants and is composed by 4 municipalities. The planning process included a work from the macro scale of the metropolitan context to the micro scale of territorial areas of metropolitan interest. Next, Rafa, please. The Human Habitat Cities Prosperity Index applied at metropolitan level, establishing the development areas that are priorities for territorial planners. Based in the index, a comprehensive metropolitan development plan was formulated. Rafa, please, next. Next, please. Whose foundation is the word of urban prosperity, where there are goals of environmental, sustainable, economic development, equity and inclusion, quality of life, and infrastructure of service and connectivity. This plan is binding for municipal planning and constitutes the roadmap of the metropolitan institutions. With the application of the MetroLab methodology that consists on the collection and analysis of multidimensional data on human settlement in the border areas of the metropolis. A bordering master plan was formulated, identifying strategy projects for the territorial harmonization of border areas and the social and economic cohesion among the settlement to the whole of the metropolis. With the application of the busy mapping methodology that comes on the participation of bicycle users, the road for the development of bicycle infrastructure that gave rise to the Metropolitan Bicycle Plan were identified. Currently, the metropolitan area of Bucaramanga has cyclo routes, office of the bicycle, and public bicycle system. Other important methodology applied was metro mapping. We served the formulation of the Metropolitan Strategy Plan for Land Use, establishing the Metropolitan Occupation Model, land management guidelines, and strategic metropolitan projects. Finally, with the Innova Metropolis methodology, the Metropolitan System Public Employment Service was established with the participation of employment agencies, employers, and governments, and good job training entities. The application of these methodologies was the basis for the formulation of the MetroHub toolkit, especially the methodologies for metropolitan management and planning tool. In the case of the metropolitan area of San Salvador, a metropolitan territory composed by 14 municipalities with almost 2 million inhabitants, a long support process through the MetroHub initiative have been deployed. The process is based on the knowledge exchange and peer-to-peer methodology, as well as the MetroHub Metropolitan Observatory tools. As initial outcome of this support, the metropolitan area managed to transform the Metropolitan Security Observatory into Territorial Metropolitan Observatory, with a focus on sustainable development, including the social, economic, environmental, and spatial dimension. Currently, the metropolitan area of San Salvador is receiving support in the reform of the Metropolitan Development and Land Use Law. Because of this, a tool known as methodology of the Metropolitan Management Pyramid had been used to improve the regulatory framework related to planning, governance, and finances. As an important outcome through this methodology, the legislative gap regarding this aspect have been identified to be addressed to at the new reform of the law proposal. The MetroHub toolkit, especially the Metropolitan Institution tool, has also been used to address the concept of metropolitan common affairs, their identification and regulation, and to strengthen the power of the metropolitan planning institution. Unlike the two previous cases of metropolitan institutions with around 30 years of existence, the metropolitan area of Santa Cruz in Bolivia, with more than 2 million inhabitants and 6 municipalities, is a nascent metropolis in its institutionalization. In 2020, Santa Cruz adopted a normative framework as a result of participatory process among the public, private, and social sector. This process was accompanied by UN Habitat applying methodologies such as the Metropolitan Vision and Participatory Metropolitan Planning, both of them contained in the MetroHub toolkit. This process allowed the identification of metropolitan common affairs and the comprehensive middle-term vision of the development of the metropolis. The next step was to formulate the regulatory framework with the support of the Metropolitan Management Pyramid methodology, which made it possible to identify the challenges in planning, governance, and finance that were addressed in the Metropolitan Law already formally adopted as an administrative act of the regional government. With the support of MetroHub, these metropolitan areas have improved their metropolitan management, especially their planning processes with adopted plans, their metropolitan knowledge management process with metropolitan observatories and the Urban Prosperity Index, their governance and financing processes with regulatory frameworks, but also their sustainable mobility, their integration and cohesion in the border zones, and their capacity development with the exchange of knowledge and experience. There are some examples of how the MetroHub initiative supports metropolitan areas through its tools and methodologies. I invite you to know and apply them. You can find them on the UN Habitat website. Thank you very much for your attention, and question, opinion, and suggestion are welcome. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Maria, for that presentation. As indicated, we'll be sharing the PowerPoint. Some of you are asking. We may also paste here the tools, the MetroHub toolkit that Maria was talking about, so that you can look at that at your leisure and reach out if need be. Okay, with Professor Jean, do we have any questions, clarification, contribution on these toolkits and how they have been applied in Bolivia, Colombia, and San Salvador?
Remy, maybe we could have Frederic's presentation as well, so that we could combine these two case studies together, and so people have an overview, and then perhaps we'll actually then can have the discussion together.
Okay.
What do you think?
If people are not bored, that's fine. We also had a small video that we thought we could share. But if you don't receive any question, you can maybe look at the case of Cameroon, where we focus on just one aspect of the Metro Hub, not the full one as we implemented, just to give you a more deeper understanding, what we call the observatory of metropolitan areas. So, Frederic, you have the floor. In the meantime, sorry, you can still post your questions there so that we can collect. Maria can reflect on it, or Rafa, or Professor Jean, and I, to have more interactive discussion. Frederic, you may proceed.
Hi, everyone. Afternoon, good morning. It's a pleasure for me to be part of this event.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's really interesting. I'm going to share my screen because I want to share what we have been doing in Douala. I'm sharing my screen.
Yeah. It's come up.
Okay now? Okay.
Yes, this is a full screen, yeah.
Okay, so I'm presenting the way we have tried to improve the metropolitan management in Africa, particularly in the case of Cameroon, in the city of Douala. As Remy mentioned, the tools or what have been used in Douala in this case is how to use the observatory to well manage, to well improve the metropolitan in Douala. So I'm starting with the plan of my presentation. I will give a brief introduction about the city, the context. I will mention the fact that we are starting from what have been done before with the Metropolitan Observatory around the world. And I will take partially the case of the Douala Metropolitan Observatory. We will present the tool, how to measure the urban development in the case of Douala. I will mention in point 4 how the data can be integrated in a platform with a model, and how the Douala Metropolitan Observatory has been established and the website that they created for that occasion. And the main important thing is how to communicate, how to share the information, the data of the observatory. This will be through the communication strategy of the Douala Metropolitan Observatory. So as Rafa mentioned in the beginning, we are living in an urban world. In the context of the rapid evolution of cities and urban dynamics around the world, we have monitored that many cities have grown beyond their boundaries. That is the case of Douala 2 in Cameroon, in Central Africa. When you look the two image picture that I'm sharing with you, the premise you see the Douala and the largest city in Cameroon, with the commercial capital of Cameroon. We are trying here to see how the interdependencies of all the data coming from this area can be managed. You have environmental data, you have population, you have social data, how all this can be managed in the integrated manner. So in the context of the new urban agenda, in the context of the agenda 2013, the city of Douala was thinking how to localize, to implement the new urban agenda that can be aligned with all those objectives, those goals. And they thought about the Douala Metropolitan Observatory. So this was for the view to manage, to plan, and to finance sustainable urban development. The main objective here is to build a multidisciplinary team to develop a metropolitan observatory integrated for the city of Douala in Cameroon. And the end of this, the goal, the output was to make the inventory of the data available, to have an efficient collection mechanism to collect data and to process those data, to have an innovative methodology to collect and to process data, to differentiate the various types of data to the typology, and mostly to design a platform model, and also to organize a training for those who be involved to handle the observatory for the city of Douala. So, as I mentioned, they did not start from nowhere. They start from what had been existing before. So there was an overview of functional urban observatory around the world. Based on that, they start to check, to looking, for example, the case of, I would say, in Ouagadougou, in Burkina Faso, where there's an urban metropolitan observatory. The case of, for example, in Lyon, in France, where there's an urban observatory. Those are the examples who allow us to be able to design what we want to do for the Douala city. So to do that, to design, the first thing that we do was to do the literature review concerning the security, the demography, the housing, how is the access to water, to electricity, how is the economic development, how is the public transport, how is the social and poverty eradication, how is the environment around Douala. The problem is that before this initiative, in 2006, Douala City created an observatory. But the problem was that the primary data which were available were not compliant in the format of the current on the standard of UN Habitat Observatory. So in the right sense of the observatory, definition of the observatory, you cannot consider what had been created in 2006 as an observatory for the city of Douala. So to proceed, there were two requirements. We want that the data should be understandable. This means the information provided must be user needs. Also, the information should be easy and should be free access. And through the information, through the data, the main tools that we were trying to reach was which indicator will allow us to be sure that what we will design will be effective and efficient. So in the right of my screen, you will see some indicators that's in French on the housing, on the economic development, and in the demography. Those are some areas where we found some indicator to be able to design, to proceed with the designing of the Douala Metropolitan Observatory. So concerning the data, concerning the effective mechanism of collection of data and process, there's this model where in the center you have the observatory and you have the data on top, and you have those arrows in the both sides going through where you can get the indicators which can allow you to understand and to allow the decision maker to take the decision, and in the right, how they can modify, develop, and go through the data to see how it happen tomorrow, to start thinking about the perspective of the city. In the other hand, this graphic which has been adapted, was adapted from what Maria did in Bucaramanga. This was this three sector in the center with the materialization of the observatory. You have the source of information, you have the utility of the information of the innovative collection methodology of data processing. So to proceed, there are three steps. Excuse me, this is in French, and I will try to explain. The first step is with the first action is to identify the information to be disseminated. This will be done through workshop with the team of the observatory. The second stage, that will be to identify the means of the dissemination with communication. This also will be done through the team of the observatory and the city of Douala. And the last stage, who will be those receiving the information. Also here again, the team of the observatory and the city of Douala will be in charge. So now I'm going to present how we can measure the urban development, the tools. So these tools from what have been created, which exists, we took from what exists. I'm taking only the two examples here of the China Urban Sustainable Index and the city blueprint. From this example, at 3 levels, we try to see how we can identify through the indicator the changing in the city, the changing in the urban area. So, as I mentioned, that the indicators are very important to measure the urban development of the city of Douala. In the case of the Douala Metropolitan Observatory, you have indicators will be coming from the health, the economy, the environment, the social area, the demography. You know, for any thematic, you'll have, for example, if I take the case of health, you'll have the mortality, you'll have access to healthcare services. We found indicators for all those sub-sector or sub-thematics, which will enable us to be able to evaluate, to measure the urban development in the city of Douala. So now I'm going to talk about that platform of data integration. We need data in this case. Data can be social data, can be demographic data, can be political data, can be economic or environmental data that we need. So for that, we have to go through the demographic evolution of the city and its expansion. We have to think about the exhaustive and cyclical sense of the population. We have to go look the inventory of social infrastructure. Those are in the left of my screen. Those are where we founded those data, and we have this to be able to think, to be in alert for the changes, for the modification in the demography, the perspective, and the methodology. And all of this will allow us to keep it to be focusing through a pool of experts who will be there in the different areas related to the observatory, like geometrician, like I say sociologists. Those experts will be around the observatory, will be managing, will be coordinating, to be taking care, to be standing in alert for the changes, for the modification in terms of data, in terms of updating information or data inside the observatory platform. So as I mentioned, to finalize, to create that observatory, there's the prerequisite. Is it a transversal observation structure? Are we dealing with, have we done the study of the demography and life condition? What can we identify as large social economic trends? And in third step, we'll be able to, through the structure of the Douala Metropolitan Observatory. This means you'll have the partners. This means the stakeholder, people involved, the administration, the social society, the civil society, universities, and you'll have for the survey on the field, for the studies, will allow us to develop, to reach at the level of what we want. As I mentioned in the beginning, the indicators, which are adapted to the observatory. This means from the partners, stakeholders, through the survey on the field, through study, we will develop adapted indicators, which are specifically designed for the Douala Metropolitan Observatory. That's what we done in first step, in 3 steps. Now, how to establish? I'll start with this diagram of hybrid technological model for the Urban Observatory of Douala. Excuse me again, this is in French. You have the graphic, you have maps, you have reports, you have data, you have geospatial data, you have administrative data. How can we manage, can we deal with all this? You can find the answer in the right with the mayor of Douala, who is thinking about, my God, I will start by what? You have to the land tenure to be secure. You have sanitation for the water. All those questions in his mind. This means how to establish, how, from where to start. The solution is through the observatory. So finally, there's one website that has been created for the purpose of the observatory. And this is the best canal, the best way to communicate the interaction between the population, between the users of the observatory is the website. You can see information on housing, information on transport, information on population, information on economy, on environment, all those information which are coming from the observatory can be extracted from the website. So as I mentioned, the decision used to be taken from information gathered from the observatory. So it's very important to be able to have access to the information. An observatory without the free access, without facilities to have access to the observatory will not be something interesting. So we thought that having a communication strategy, which is based on objectives, which target audience to the real message that you want to send, to the resources in a time scale, which can be evaluated and amended, is that a good strategy which will enable us to make it efficient, the use of the Douala Metropolitan Observatory. So to conclude, the Douala Metropolitan Observatory will build on existing infrastructure and data available. This is to reach at the multifunctional platform. I want to mention also that the platform could be used by researchers, policymakers, stakeholders to communicate, to share an information. Mostly, I will say that the platform will contribute to the implementation of the sectorial policy through the sectorial data management. And to finish, I will say that the design of the Douala Metropolitan Observatory will require an interdisciplinary team of experts. I want to add that this work was conducted also with the support of Maria, who were in Cameroon 2 years ago. So that's what I was to mention and to say thanks to all of you to listen to me. Over to you, Remy.
Thank you, Frederic. Thank you again, Maria. Prof. Sajin. Yes, should we solicit a few reactions, comments?
Yeah, well, while I think the colleagues are thinking of these questions, perhaps I could use the time to ask a question to start with. And talking about, while you're talking, I could think that what you are basically proposing is a strategy with 4 or 5 different pillars. There's policy and legislation. There is planning and design. There is governance. There's finance. Then there's also management and delivery. And now thinking back to the really successful projects that urban modelers have delivered in the past. For example, Marcel has been actually doing wonderful projects for several decades of doing this. I could remember that actually what was done was that the modeling team was talking to both the policymakers and the people in the delivery agencies who will then understand and also to digest this information so that the model information from planning design side is then filtered through to policy making. But that's an enormous undertaking. And I just wondered whether Remy and colleagues would have a feel of how to do this. In the past, what we have done, particularly under the leadership of Martial, was really to do those projects that the modelers have accumulated years, if not decades, of experience. So there is an issue of how to scale this up to areas that the modelers actually do not really have this rapport with the local government and delivery agencies. So I was wondering that how you have actually negotiated this kind of relationship between the people who are doing the numbers and the guidance and the people who are doing the actual delivery on the ground.
Okay, Rafa, you want to pick this? You still putting some comments?
Yeah, I can try to address that. Maybe the thing that I would like to highlight is that, for instance, for the analysis that we are doing on Metropolitan data trends and case studies, we are doing them jointly with the Metropolitan practitioners, actually. We are not by ourselves, but we composed a working group on Metropolises, and we are actually also starting to establishing a network on universities network on Metropolises. We are exploring several areas of work with several universities, capacity building, of course, but also sectorial areas like culture. We have here some colleagues from Jerusalem leading that work on culture. Also, we are exploring a network on governance, metropolitan governance. And the thing is that we are not working alone, but we have the honor to count on both academicians, metropolitan practitioners, also metropolitan representatives within this working group. Metropolitan authorities are represented there, and of course we think that the most proper way to preparing this study, this conclusion, this finding is working together with you. Maybe the last thing is that I extend the invite to all of you to write us, and if you are interested in to participate in this working group and also in this network of universities, of course you are welcome, and we will be very happy to connect you as well.
Thanks.
I was wondering whether, sorry, Remy, you're going to say something?
No, I was just saying that we have posted some resources on the chat for anyone who is interested. But if there are no other questions, I can elaborate further on your queries, or Maria can come in. I can see Martial. And
Martial, would you like to comment on this? Because you're the one who actually have led a lot of this work.
Yeah, thank you. In following your comment, I think what you are doing in the observatory around the world is a very, very useful thing. And I hope that Maria del Pilar is establishing common standards of information in order to compare between one city and the other, and especially the evolution of each city. Ideally, we ought to have similarities in the type of data we collect, and the unit we use, so we can compare between one country and the other. So I hope that this being done in some form, which may be possible to learn from one experience to another, from another. But I would like to say that data in itself is not sufficient for planning and managing metropolitan areas. It is essential, but not sufficient. And we need to have also the capability of predictions in order to, and that's a modeling exercise. We are capable of running policies like, if, then what will happen? If we do this, what happened? So that kind of capability for exploration alternatives is essential, I think, for planning policies, and especially for evaluating what is the goodness or otherwise of the policy. And finally, I think you have touched, Rafael, the importance of design, because by itself, data and predictions are not sufficient if you want to change the future. You need to have design alternatives, which include policies, design of policies, which to do with regulation, to do with pricing, as well as investment. So the design component is something which is an addition to data and forecast. And that design component, we need to learn from each other's experience, from countries that had gone, or city has gone through similar process, and how they cope with it, and what kind of policy they implemented. So the design aspect need to be done as well. So I think that the observatory is an essential part, but we need to develop, in order to be helpful to Metropolitan Authority, the capability of forecasting and the capability of assembling design alternative of policies, of regulations, design, and investment. So that's my comment.
Thanks a lot, Masha. I think this is very important advice. That's why, from our perspective, all these elements are connected. There's no one, there are different entry points. And I think if you have seen your idea of learning, if you have shown the Metro Hub, one of the functions of the Metro Hub is cross-learning across cities, across metropolitan areas. And I can see many faces here, from Eric to Gabriel and other. We have been working in these areas to really bring these metropolitan areas together for cross-learning. And one of the initiatives we had was with MRT that Gabriel was leading on. So a lot of effort there, and I think there are many. Even Professor Turner is creating this type of network, just again for cross-learning. So this is quite essential. And Eric knows that many here believes in that cross-learning and cross-fertilization and peer-to-peer. Just want to mention that. Maria, you want to say something else?
Yes, Remy. The metropolitan area are making a comparison with observatories and networks in Latin America. Soon we will have a new strategy for Latin America in community of practice, focus on in metropolitan management. Is an opportunity for metropolitan areas make the comparison and exchange knowledge and experience.
Can I say something? Or?
Eric, go ahead, please.
Yeah, just for Douala, I know that you are you have an agreement with I think the World Bank to work on the the creation of an urban planning agency that can, the same for Yaoundé and Douala. I don't know how far you are engaged in that project. I think this is crucial because this can enlarge the function of the urban observatory and to be really an advisory board for the decision makers to define policies and strategy at the metropolitan level. At the scale of sub-Saharan African countries, we launched with the Metropolitan and Territorial Planning Agency Global Network. We launched initiative led by Bamako to support the creation or the strengthening of urban planning agency in Africa. With the support of, in our network, we have the French, the Mexican, and the Moroccan planning agency networks. So it represents 140 planning agencies. And I know that we signed an agreement during Africité in Marrakesh 2 years ago to support different cities to strengthen or to create planning agencies. And so there is 7 Moroccan planning agencies that's supporting in Dakar, Abidjan, Saint-Lomé, Niamey, and others. But I don't know if Douala is involved in that initiative. I don't remember. But if you are not involved in that network, we'll be pleased to have you on board.
Okay, I can see Professor Turner want to also comment.
Yes, thank you, Remy and Rafa and Maria for the really enlightening presentations. We are now looking at setting up a hub which will look at culture and heritage. In fact, we've taken on board the fact that culture is an enabler for sustainable development, and therefore the importance of understanding the new identities of multiple conurbations. Together, Eric is, I see on the screen as well, that we're already 12 universities with 12 governance structures merging together, and we hope that with the new UN Habitat Uni framework that we will be able to then put this into order. We're looking very much forward to strengthening this and linking the case studies which look at heritage and dovetail them with the global sample which Rafa explained. Thank you.
Prof. Jean, maybe should we address this? And I know you have about 5 minutes left, if not less.
Yeah, well, yeah, this is a very good moment actually to thank the whole team that led by you, Remy, in doing this work. Well, certainly we find this work really inspiring, and so I'm using your Metropolitan, the state of the metropolitan areas booklet in my teaching, because I encourage my students to look at these questions, because as architects, they need to look at Rafael's kind of a bar chart of looking at where the cities are and what structures they're going to be, and how the cities are going to have a different kind of dynamics for younger people. And in the metropolitan areas I have been, the larger the city, it seems that the more open they are to migrants, and therefore migrants appears to be attracted much more to the larger ones rather than the medium-sized or smaller ones. But this is a gross generalization that I know, but all these phenomenon we are in fact looking at in our PhD studies at the moment, of looking at how these dynamics attract different kinds of people in different areas. The same thing is happening in the UK, even in the developed world. similar kind of dynamics also exist. For example, people are now being attracted much more to London and Southeast, including Cambridge and Oxford, from the English North and from these devolved nations and so on. And in addition, now through this presentation, we also now have seen a really comprehensive exposition of how you use different pillars to make this policy cogent and policy relevant, which is really important. Certainly, once we have digested the material that Rafael has put in the chat box, which I've now copied and sent to my colleagues to take a look, and then perhaps we'll come back to you for a longer conversation about actually exactly how we've done it. And also, certainly in Cambridge, we have always pursued a tradition which is established by Martial in looking at how models could be used for real world applications. And so that's also an experience that we'd like to compare notes with you. So on those, it's been extremely illuminating a set of lectures, and for that we're really grateful for your help. And also brilliantly, you have also managed within the time that to give us the 5 minutes actually to change over to the next. And so for that, we're really grateful, and we have a lot of thanks and gratitude towards you. So I hope to be in touch again once we have read more of your materials.
Thanks a lot, Prof. Maybe just a bracket to just confirm with Eric that yes, we'll be interested in knowing more and trying to synchronize a bit more. Also to announce that with the Metro Hub, we are now developing a curriculum of metropolitan management, and we have one with the National University of Colombia that we are starting the master course this year. So a lot of many things happening. Reach out if you feel, and we want to reach out. Extend this to anyone who would like to use some of these resources we are having to understand, to progress the work of metropolitan management and other areas of work. So it has been a great pleasure that to contribute and learn in this exercise. Thanks a lot for the questions and input. So we're gonna keep listening in, and this has been a very, very exciting program put together, Professor Jin and the team. So on behalf of UN Habitat and colleagues, thanks a lot.
Well, thank you. And certainly this is an effort of lots of people. Martial is deeply involved, and Professor Mike Batty, who is also now he's just actually had to be pulled away to another meeting that I'm aware for the UK pandemic response, that he's part of the Royal Society team looking at that. And also Professor Michael Wegener, who actually just come on, and I'm not sure whether at this moment he is on, but certainly I will talk to them. And also we have lots of colleagues in the university as a research team, and they were deeply interested in that. So I really hope that you and colleagues will return to this and to tell us more about the work. And certainly we're looking at some of the teaching material as well in a program that is funded by Innovate UK and the Arab Foundation, the Arab Foundation, which is an engineering firm called the Digital Cities for Change. And there may be some connections there. So once I've read more of the material, we'll come back to you.
Great. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Remy and Rafael and Maria and Frederic, and also the related colleagues that have not had time to talk to, like Eric and Mr. Turner and others. So you're really welcome, and so I hope to see you again. Yeah, do listen in, because at the next session, which
Thank you, Ying. Thank you.
Marcel will be.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Professor.
say bye-bye for now, right? But you're welcome to listen in, but the next one is going to be much more theoretical, but actually some of the arguments you might find it interesting as well as examples, more in the more technical areas of the modeling work.